start getting things kicked off here this week. Of course, a big ticket item to talk about is Hurricane Helene that swept through the southeast over the last 7 days. On a tragedy standpoint, quite a bit of an impact. At least I saw the death toll last time I looked was about 31 people had been killed by the storm. But also looking at the agricultural impacts, I mean, the crop acres and a lot of the storm impacts, and looking at processing facilities too, quite a bit of a just big swath area that got impacted by this storm. But I mean, even talking after you talk about that storm particularly, I mean, just on a big picture level, kind of where are we sitting too? Or was it more just an isolated event, or is it kind of still working at a lot of these issues in terms of drought that we're seeing across the US?
Yeah, Helene's going to go down as one of the most impactful storms to make landfall in U.S. history, just given the fact that we saw so much flooding. In fact, you're looking at a map here just over the last 7 days of total accumulated precip. The fatality count, I think, will still go up. We're still searching for people. And it's because if you look at these rainfall totals in the southeast, I mean, through parts of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, even into Kentucky and Tennessee, there was widespread 5 inches, many areas over 10 inches, in some places here up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were approaching 20 inches of rainfall. And I'm sure you've seen the images and the videos of just the catastrophic levels of flooding. And so there's no way to put this lightly, just the devastation that's happened because of this event. Another way to look at it is this is the last 7 days of precipitation. We look at it as a percent of normal. Most of the country was like bone dry, other than one little system that snuck through ahead of Helene. Most of us saw nothing. If you take a look at down there in the southeast, though, some of these locations are 1,000 to 1,500% of normal precipitation. So that's just how much was delivered in such a short amount of time. Helene's wind field, just take a look at this. If you notice my color bar before I zoom in on it, these colors are above 80. So this would be hurricane force winds. You take a look all the way into almost South Carolina, we saw hurricane force winds. And we watched that wrap around, and I got some reports from Indiana that these strong winds kind of knocked the tops off of corn. You ever seen it happen in fall? You can just knock the top off above the ear. Didn't hear of a lot of damage yet, but still, there were some strong winds in through this area this weekend as well. So when you just look back at Helene and the impact that this hurricane had, from the winds to the incredible rains, it's going to be one of our more historic storms, and it'll definitely be a name that gets retired. But Dawson, outside of that, we had a lot of folks that haven't been able to buy a drop of water. I mean, just take a look at this whole entire part of the Corn Belt here, getting into the Northern Plains, the Upper Midwest, extremely dry. Down here in the Southern Plains, down here in this part of Texas, in the Northeast. I mean, there are several areas across the country that have been extremely dry. And so while we watch this hit peanuts and cotton, corn, so it hits so many crops in the Southeast, and just, I mean, devastated crops in this area. We'll have to wait to see what the insurance payouts look like. The rest of the country's like, we can't get enough water. It's been so dry as of late, and it's been hot. I mean, these are the precipitation ranks by climate district. These are the temperature ranks. Look how much warmer it has been here compared to average. Some places having their hottest September on record across the northern tier of the United States. But these stats here are what concerns me. And tomorrow I'm going to head on up to Fargo, and I'm very much looking forward to this trip just to see, this is an area that all we talked about all year long was just incredible flooding, wettest on record in parts of Iowa, Minnesota, parts of South Dakota. And then now we finish the year with record dry. So what an incredible flip-flop. What I'm most worried about, I'm just going to echo the same thing we've been talking about for the last few weeks, is this. Our soil moisture values are so depleted throughout much of the plains, the Missouri Basin, the Mississippi Basin, and parts of the Ohio Basin, that if we don't see correction on this in fall, then we'll carry this drought all the way till spring. And that'll be a situation that spring will be very, just be vulnerable. It'll just be very vulnerable to the fact that we don't have the moisture there, meaning if we don't get just-in-time rains next spring and summer, this is going to be an area that's not going to have the moisture in place to develop a good crop. Now, with Helene, we did bring the Mississippi River levels up. It was 10 feet below low stage right here before, and now we're back to low stage at 0 feet. So, but the problem is this, and then this is the forecast. I just kind of annotated a graphic here just to show you what we're expecting. And we're going to see more ridging in the middle part of the country over the next 14 days than anything else. And the result here is going to be a very dry forecast as we go forward. And what's funny, Dawson, is I've had some farmers are just like, fantastic, great, I'm going to get the crop to dry down, I'm going to get it out. It was already made. I have other growers that are like, this is bad news for now and for later, for fall field work, for next spring, for the fire threat that's going on in this area. And that's certainly something we have to be thinking about. So a lot of folks says, is there any more tropical systems coming up? Are we going to get another thing out of the Gulf? And as you see here from what I've drawn, there is the possibility of another system developing over the Yucatan. I've given it a 50% chance of developing based off model data. The National Hurricane Center has given it a 40% chance of developing. But the reality is, the system to make it into the United States would really have to have a strong Bermuda high sitting somewhere right here. And this Bermuda high right now is way over here toward Africa. In fact, you can see it. That's where the Bermuda high is currently sitting, getting all of these systems just to curl around its edge, actually going over toward Europe, which if you haven't heard, there's been some major flooding in Great Britain as of late. So I pull all that together and say our pattern is going to be dominated by deep lows that come into the Gulf of Alaska and have to run over a ridge. And the result of all of that is very, very dry conditions. And the dry conditions this past weekend, take a look at Sunday evening, huge fires forcing evacuations in parts of Wyoming, other fires in Idaho, Oregon, some in California. And the winds that are ahead of this system today are putting out across 7 states red flag warnings. And there's some cold air behind it. There's a freeze warning already in northern Idaho and parts of Montana. So that's what the topic is going to be. This next system ripping through here, delivering some very, very strong winds, while we're expecting gusts maybe in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range twice over the next 7 days, once now and once again this weekend. But when you look at all of it put together, that's what I got for total precip over the next 7 days. There's a lot of zeros on that map in the midsection of the country. And this is what week 2 looks like. No real significant change, still looking pretty dry. So let's talk about the temperatures before we stretch it out a little bit. With that colder air coming in on the backside, over the next 7 days, I see 2 time periods where we could hit some frosty temperatures in the areas that are shown in gray. To kind of give you an idea on that, let me just shrink that so you can see a little better here. Let's also refresh this. This is the latest, there it is. This is the latest I've got on minimum temperatures. Here we go. So this was this morning. Tomorrow morning, all throughout the western high plains here, risk of frost. By Wednesday morning, it's now sitting over Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri with low temperatures that might touch the upper 30s in places, and a frost event that'll hit parts of Wisconsin and lower Michigan. Then we get into Thursday, Friday. Here comes the second round of colder air, like I mentioned this weekend, that dips down into the Great Lakes states again. In between, though, watch the temperatures rebound. This is, let's take you back. Sorry, that's Monday today. This is now getting into Tuesday, Wednesday. Look at this heat coming back in right behind this thing. I mean, so you're going to get frost risk 90s. Like that's what we're talking about, the temperature pattern doing back and forth here. And then you have again Thursday, Friday, another round of cooler weather, and then it bounces back up again. So you say, well, when you average all that together, what wins? What wins is the warm. So you say day 5 through 10, you see more warm conditions in here than cool. But the reality is that pattern's going to kind of bounce up and down in terms of temperatures across the northern tier of the United States into the Corn Belt. But it's October. We expect that kind of behavior in October from the atmosphere. So yes, that's the big story. After we kind of recover from Helene, it's a question of how long do we stay as dry as currently forecast.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you bring up the field work part of it. And as you said, some guys are going to be loving the fact that, they can get this crop out of the ground, no problem. And then what's kind of neat is that the USDA's crop progress report has a little section in there that says, you have this many days that were suitable for field work in these different states. That's great on a harvest level, but when you are talking about the fall application, it's the concern that you're going to be trying to put some anhydrous on in some really dry soils that could be a problem here down the line. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch that moving forward. And so when you talk about that on a long range perspective, what are we going to be looking at? Because this could set guys up for an unfavorable, fall application season that could carry over in the spring.
Yeah. I mean, this is the news from the CPC, and it makes a lot of sense. This is what you would typically get when you have a developing La Nina, when the West Pacific Oscillation is positive and the MJO is back over to phase 1. Those are 3 big drivers right now. This is the result. And you tend to be more mild in the midsection of the country than cool. There's cool days, but it just tends to be more mild. And unfortunately, this is not the right pattern to get any sort of moisture in. And this is echoed by the European model. This was its new October outlook. I mean, now the color bar often makes us freak out, and I get that, but like, my goodness, This is suggesting lows start here, they move into British Columbia, the flow goes over a bigger ridge, and we just get tucked away into nothing. And as a result, we are going to have very dry conditions as we go forward. And I'm very concerned about what that means for the longer term. Now, we still have to discuss La Nina. It's there, and we are expecting the trade winds to kind of pick up again. That's what that shading of color represents. But if La Nina gets going, it's usually not until November and December that the midsection of the country gets going active again. And that means dry fall conditions are likely going to be what we're expecting. You can see that in the newest data from the CFSV2. I'm going to show you the North American precipitation forecast for October, November, December, mostly dry in this area. But that's again 3 whole months put together. I'd say that most of that dryness is in the front half, not the back half. And the reason for that is as you go farther into the season, like December, January, February, now the risk of staying dry is pretty far into the south and into the west. And I think that will likely be the pattern with probably a pretty active midwinter time period like January, February, March in the Midwest and northern tier of the United States with systems rolling through. But I'll tell you something, man. This forecast you see here, it's entirely La Nina-ish. It's what you'd expect out of the models if La Nina is going to dominate. And that's certainly what we're getting out of this. And by the way, so is the temperature forecast. Here is the January, February, March temperatures. Just split it right down the middle there, and you're colder north and warmer south. And that is the exact opposite. Like flip it, and you had last year's forecast, which was El Nino. So, in one long breath there, Dawson, I don't like how the beginning of fall sets up. It seems they're going to have to wait later in fall for moisture to return. I'm just too concerned that we get too cold, not letting enough of it soak in, and we carry this fall's drought into next spring. So that your point there is well taken.
Yeah, definitely something to be concerned on, just getting our soil moisture reserves in for, that next crop to come in as we're finishing up this current planting season. But moving on for more of a big international picture too, of course, is looking at South America, particularly Brazil. Got the latest numbers this morning saying that, we're still a little bit behind on the soybean planting pace for Brazil. However, it's still not quite that October, or we're just starting that October timeframe of when we could be getting a little bit of their monsoon season. So how are they shaping up here for those expectations?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned a moment ago the Bermuda high sitting right in this area, which is kind of funneling all the moisture into Europe. The fact that the Bermuda high is so strong right here is actually influencing kind of a sister high pressure system that's to the south. So what's interesting is flow around that one typically goes like this when it sets up. So it's the opposite of the northern hemisphere. Well, that's not set up yet. And as a result, it's very wet in southern Brazil. I'll show you that again in a few moments, but it's allowed the dry season to carry all the way through September. And so we've not, yeah, like you said, I can just grab numbers from Mato Grosso. I just know where to find these quick on the internet. Last year they were, 4.19% as of Friday, right? This year they're at less than 0.5%. But you made the point, from October the 4th to November the 1st, we plant 85% of the crop. And that will be the time frame to watch. So what we need to know is if rains come in, you'll see this come up and it'll do something like that. If they don't come in, then you stay down here for longer. And that difference is huge. I mean, if we stay off planting pace through mid October by 20, 25%, you know this better than I do, but this is a US markets have to cover kind of situation. And that could be another positive note that's created by weather. But the latest forecast for the next 10 days looks something like this. A lot of very wet conditions down here, Rio Grande do Sul, northern Argentina. But you do notice that the model's trying to toss in some scattered precip. This is not enough. They need widespread 50 millimeters of rainfall, and then they need to come back every week for them to really aggressively plant. But most of the models have now flipped back over to a wetter look going into the month of October, really the second half of October. And the model forecasting flip-flop has been maddening from the Europeans here. But this is their newest look, and that is not a bearish signal if those rains do come in. That would actually be a signal that they're going to start to plant very, very quickly. We just need to know what the current delays have cost them and if it's going to carry on for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, beyond the soybean crop, I mean, even if they get planted a little bit later and still get rains on later and help that crop push along, it's still the idea of how much of that window is left for the next crop that's supposed to come in after that, and if that would cause any additional issues with that one as well.
Yeah, and safrinha corn is going to be put under some pressure this year, given the troubles that Argentina has with that bacteria and the fact that acreage is going to be down there, and just some of the stuff we've seen lately with the corn crop quality in the United States as it's getting harvested. So I do think there is a weather enhancement to the market story that we're going to have to pay attention to for the, well, for the next 6 months while we watch them grow a crop. So good thing we talk every Monday.
Yep, of course, we're going to keep our eye on that here moving forward, and always appreciate your insights. Hopefully next week, maybe we can get a little bit better signals for possible system for US. But yeah, not great things looking forward to for the next 10 days at least. But again, always appreciate the insights, Eric, and have a great week.
Yep, thank you.